They say in California, the danger isn't always what stalks the streets below, but what stands, perfectly still, above you. High in the dark spine of the Santa Ana Mountains, as the last light bleeds from the sky, hikers whisper about figures that appear on the ridgelines, towering, cloaked shapes with wide-brimmed hats, featureless faces turned toward the trails. They never speak. They never step closer. They simply watch and vanish the moment you dare to focus on them. Some call it a trick of light, a shadow thrown by the setting sun. Others insist these are the same silent sentinels seen for centuries along California's coastal peaks, the Dark Watchers. Tonight, we follow the stories into their territory and ask what really waits in the fading light above the Santa Ana Mountains.
The Santa Ana winds scrape across the ridges. The last light of day bleeds out behind the California mountains. All across the state, hikers know this twilight well, but fewer know the stories whispered about what stands in that fading light. Somewhere along a lonely trail, high above the valleys, a figure appears on the ridgeline. Tall, motionless, wrapped in darkness like a cloak. It does not approach, it does not call out, it only watches. For centuries, travelers have reported them. Across California folklore, they carry a single unsettling name: the Dark Watchers. Silent silhouettes that appear at dawn and dusk, towering above the world, and vanishing the moment anyone dares to get too close. Tonight we walk into their territory. It usually begins like this. A hiker, alone near dusk, looks up from the narrow path. At first, they think they see another person, maybe a fellow traveler outlined against the sky. The figure is tall, impossibly tall. It seems wrapped in a heavy cloak, a wide-brimmed hat cutting a hard line against the clouds. Sometimes a long staff or walking stick is visible at its side. The hiker squints. The distance is deceptive, the light strange. Maybe it's just a tree or a rock, but the more they stare, the more human it becomes. And then comes the realization that chills the spine. The figure is not moving, not waving, not walking, just standing there as if it has been there a very long time, watching. Stories say that if the hiker looks away, if they blink or steady their shaking breath, the shape will be gone, swallowed back into the mountain's shadow. The legend didn't begin on social media. It didn't start in a horror movie or a found footage clip. Spanish settlers in the 1700s were among the first to write about them. They called these figures los vigilantes oscuros, the Dark Watchers. To the settlers, the mountains of California were vast and unknown, their slopes carved with trails older than any European map. Whispers circulated that on certain evenings, dark guardians could be seen standing on the ridges, keeping silent watch over anyone who dared to cross below. Some said they were spirits of the land, protectors that predated even the newcomer's language. Others believed they were omens, shapes you never wanted to see twice. There are suggestions, though not hard proof, that older native traditions may have held stories of powerful presences in these mountains. Not exactly the Dark Watchers as we know them, but beings that made people tread carefully on sacred ground. Over time, the name changed. The Spanish faded, the borders shifted, but the Watchers remained, always just far enough away to never be clearly understood. Witnesses across centuries agree on one thing. The Dark Watchers look human, but are not human. They're described as 10 feet tall or more, their forms slim but towering, like columns of night. They wear long, draped cloaks that seem to drink in all light. Their hats, wide-brimmed and old-fashioned, give them an almost pilgrim-like outline. Sometimes they are alone, sometimes several stand together in still, silent rows. But if you try to focus on any details, a face, a hand, the edge of a coat, the clarity falls apart. There are no eyes reflecting the light, no mouth, no skin, just a suggestion of a person carved out of shadow. The poet Robinson Jeffers once wrote of forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They emerge from the quiet twilight, stand in rigid silence on the ridgelines, and then melt back into the dark as if they were never there at all. One story, told again and again, takes us back to the late 1800s. A farmer was riding through the mountains near the end of the day. The sun hung low, turning the rocks gold and the shadows black. As he guided his horse around a bend, he noticed a figure standing on the ridgeline above him. Tall, cloaked, watching. Thinking it was a traveler, the farmer raised his hand and waved, a friendly gesture to a stranger in lonely country. The figure slowly tipped its hat in reply, a small, polite nod. Encouraged, the farmer decided to climb up and greet his fellow traveler. He turned off the trail, working his way up the rocky hillside, heart pounding with the effort as he kept the figure in sight. But when he reached the top of the ridge, there was nothing. No footprints in the dust, no displaced stones, no crushed plants, just wind, rock, and the sinking sun. Only then did the farmer realize he had never heard so much as a breath from the stranger. Not a rustle of clothing, not a creak of boots. The watchers, it seemed, preferred to remain only that, watchers. Decades later, in the 1930s, another story emerged from hikers in the Santa Lucia Range, a scene that could have been lifted straight from a nightmare. A small group was making their way up a steep trail. The air was thin, every breath slightly harder than the last. As they neared the crest of a ridge, one of them pointed ahead. On the horizon, several dark shapes stood against the glowing sky. At first, the hikers thought they were trees or tall rocks, but the silhouettes were too clean, too straight, too human. People? Someone suggested. Maybe other hikers had reached the summit first. But these figures did not move. They did not shift their weight, talk, or gesture. They just watched. Nervous but curious, the group pushed onward. With every step, the shapes held their positions, looming larger, darker, more defined. And then, in the final stretch, the last few meters of climb, the hikers lost sight of the ridge for only a moment. When they reached the top, they were alone. The stony ground showed no footprints, no broken twigs, no sign that anyone or anything had been standing there at all. But each hiker swore they had seen them. Rows of tall, dark observers waiting for them to arrive, and then deciding, at the last second, to vanish. For some locals, the Dark Watchers were less a threat and more a mysterious presence to be respected. One story, passed down through families of Central California, tells of a woman who grew up hearing about the Watchers as a girl. Her mother, it said, would sometimes bring simple offerings into the mountains. Food left on a quiet outcropping, a small gesture of goodwill toward whatever lived in the ridges. Hours later, when she would return, the food would be gone. In its place, fresh flowers, carefully arranged where the offering had been. No footprints, no sign of animals tearing into a meal, just the strange sense of having been noticed and, perhaps, acknowledged. Were the Dark Watchers guardians? Spirits that accepted respect and returned it in their own silent way? Or was something else roaming the mountains? Something with long fingers and a fondness for ritual? We are left only with the same thing the mother had: questions and an uneasy gratitude that whatever was watching chose to remain distant. In John Steinbeck's short story, Flight, a character spots shadowy figures on a ridge. Steinbeck adds one chilling detail. It is known that if you do not acknowledge them, they will not harm you. This is the whispered rule of the Dark Watchers. Do not wave, do not call out, do not stare for too long. Pretend they are not there, and you might pass safely beneath their gaze. It's a simple bargain. You continue your journey, they continue theirs, standing at the edge of the world, silent and unmoving. But the rule suggests something important. The Watchers can do more than watch. They choose not to, unless provoked, unless approached, unless acknowledged. Folklore warns that those who walk directly toward them, who try to close the distance and break their stillness, sometimes never come back. To friends and families below, these people simply vanish, lost to cliffs, to crevices, or as some locals quietly insist, to the Watchers themselves. Of course, not everyone believes in phantom sentinels. Scientists and skeptics offer explanations rooted not in ghosts, but in light, shadow, and the fragile human mind. One theory points to a phenomenon known as the Brocken spectre. In certain conditions, when the sun is low and the air is filled with mist, an observer's own shadow can be projected onto distant clouds, enlarged, distorted, and seemingly detached from their body. The result? A giant dark figure standing on the fog itself, mimicking the Watcher's outline. Another explanation is pareidolia, the brain's habit of turning random shapes into familiar forms. Faces in the clouds, bodies in the trees, dark cloaks in the twisting patterns of rock and shadow. In the thin air of high altitudes, with oxygen just a little harder to come by, our senses can misfire. Fatigue, dehydration, and low oxygen can all feed hallucinations that feel startlingly real. Add in infrasound, low-frequency vibrations created by the wind, and you get feelings of unease and dread with no obvious source. In this view, the Dark Watchers are not supernatural entities, but reflections of weather, of geology, of the brain's desperate need to make sense of the unknown. But even the most rational explanations can feel small when you are alone on a silent mountain trail and a towering, unmoving figure appears on the ridge above you. Although many stories fix the Dark Watchers in the Santa Lucia Mountains along the central coast, their legend drifts, like mist following the spine of California's ranges. In the Santa Ana Mountains, ridges rise abruptly from suburbs and citrus groves, their backs turned toward the Pacific haze. Here, at the edge of sprawling modern California, the land still has pockets of isolation. Narrow fire roads, dry creek beds, and sudden views over endless city lights. Hikers in these hills report the same uneasy feeling, that at the very limit of vision, where orange urban glow meets cold mountain sky, something is standing there, silent, tall, indifferent. In these mountains, the contrast is stark. Streetlights below, ancient darkness above. If the Dark Watchers are guardians, then in the Santa Anas, they stand between the world as we know it and the world we try very hard to ignore. Consider a more recent night. A solo hiker takes a late trail into the Santa Ana foothills. The plan is simple: reach a viewpoint, watch the sunset, head back down. By the time they reach the overlook, the sky is already fading from orange to deep blue. Below, the cities flicker to life, a blanket of light stretching to the horizon. The hiker snaps a few photos, sits on a rock, and lets the silence soak in. Then, a feeling. The sense that someone is standing nearby. Not close, but not far enough. They turn. Across a narrow canyon, on the opposite ridge, stands a single dark figure. It is motionless. No flashlight, no reflective gear. Just a long, vertical shape wrapped in darkness. The hiker watches it. The figure does not wave, does not move. Seconds stretch, maybe minutes. It's hard to tell. The hiker blinks, looks down at their phone, raises it again to take a picture. And the ridge is empty. No movement, no sound of sliding rocks or breaking twigs. Just empty sky, soft wind, and the low hum of the world below. Later, scrolling through the photos, the hiker swears one frame shows a thinner, taller shadow standing where the figure had been. Was it a trick of light? A distant tree briefly misread? Or did the watcher simply decide it had seen enough? The Dark Watchers occupy more than just ridgelines. They live in a psychological borderland. They appear in moments when people are alone, tired and exposed, when the line between the outer world and the inner one grows thin. In that space, a distant rock can become a person can become a watcher, and a watcher can become a story carried down from the mountains. Some see them as a reflection of our deepest fear, being observed by something we do not understand. Others see them as the embodiment of nature's indifference, towering shapes that care nothing for human plans, only for the slow turning of sky and stone. Whether ethereal beings or tricks of perception, the Dark Watchers ask an uncomfortable question. When you feel you are being watched, who exactly is looking back? The Dark Watchers have stepped quietly from folklore into culture. Poets like Robinson Jeffers gave them language. Forms that look human to human eyes, but are certainly not human. Authors like John Steinbeck folded them into stories of the California coast, passing down the hush and warning of older generations. Modern writers and filmmakers echo their outline in new shapes, in mysterious figures on remote CCTV feeds, in silhouettes in the background of mountain thrillers, in nameless watchers hovering at the edge of the frame. They have become a symbol of the unknown presence that shares our landscape. The notion that when the sun drops behind the hills, we are not always the only observers left awake. So what are the Dark Watchers? Guardians of sacred mountains, shadows of our own fears stretched across the cliff face, the ghosts of travelers who never found their way home, or just tricks of light and tired eyes staring too long into the fading day? Maybe the answer lies somewhere in between, in the uneasy compromise between science and story, between what we can explain and what still waits quietly on the horizon. The next time you find yourself on a high trail in the Santa Ana Mountains or anywhere along California's rugged spine, pause for a moment at dusk. Look toward the ridges where sky meets stone. And if you see a tall, motionless figure standing alone against the last light, remember the old advice: do not wave, do not call out, do not stare too long. Just lower your eyes, continue on your path, and be grateful that tonight the Dark Watchers have chosen only to watch.
Santa Ana Mountains have no shortage of explanations. Science offers shadows, mist, and the tired mind of a lone hiker. But science cannot explain the flowers left in place of an offering. It cannot explain the hat slowly tipped toward a stranger on a ridge. And it cannot explain why, for 300 years across every generation that has walked these peaks, the the stories never change. The figures are always tall, always cloaked, always watching. So the next time the sun drops behind the California hills and the ridgelines go dark, resist the urge to look up. Because if the old warnings hold any truth, the moment you acknowledge them is the moment they acknowledge you. And out here, in the fading light of the Santa Ana Mountains, some things are better left unwatched. Thank you so much for visiting my channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please tap that like button. I would also appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to my channel. To be notified of new episodes, click the bell icon. Until next time, my spookies, take care and watch your six.